Chapter 44. 2 months later, Pilgrim stepped through the doors of La Amethyst to be greeted by an effusive and clearly emotional Mr. Mylar. He'd taken her to his private office, away from the enthusiastic greetings and curious eyes of other members. She'd never entered his office. Its immaculate interior made perfect sense of the man. He'd been informal, kind, and generous, saying her apartment was as it should be, and of course to make any changes she saw fit. She thanked him for every consideration he'd shown her over the years, and added that she knew she was an imposition, but hoped to be able to curb such extremes in the future. Neither one of them believed that possible, but he welcomed the sentiment. He reminded her that, granted, although she was unique and presented a particular set of challenges, there were other members who required a great deal more management. Neither one of them believed that possible, but she too welcomed the sentiment. There had been the slightest hesitation before he'd stated that Dashwood had been keeping her apartment. He'd arrived back one day on crutches. During his ensuing convalescence, he'd spent many nights alone until the early hours of the morning, playing the piano in the lounge bar. Pilgrim had taken a moment to put aside her conflicting emotions, realizing if Dashwood didn't want anything to do with her, he wouldn't have returned. He insisted upon it, Mr. Mylar reassured. I understand. She smiled tightly, not sure how she was going to handle the situation. Has Dashwood spoken to you about what happened? She inquired hesitatingly. Mr. Dashwood would never entertain such an indiscretion. It was sufficient he asked to return to his post, Mr. Mylar said. Then I won't keep him waiting any longer. She rose and shook his hand. Escorting her to the door, Mr. Mylar stopped. A parcel arrived for you this morning. I'll have it sent up. Thank you, she said. Pilgrim exited the lift on her floor, nodding to security before taking a deep breath as she stood hesitatingly in front of her apartment doors. Before she'd had time to reconsider, it was immediately opened by Dashwood, clearly relieved that the news of her return had not been a lie. Miss Pilgrim, it's good to have you back, he smiled. For one frightening minute, she thought he was going to hug her, but thankfully he didn't. She couldn't withstand a kindness from him, as she hadn't forgiven herself for Baxter's death. Taking his cue, he smiled back. Thank you, Dashwood. Entering, she barely recognized the newly decorated apartment. It had an entirely different style, characteristic of Art Deco, and she liked it. Your idea? She asked. It seemed more in keeping with La Amethyst. We can, of course, change it, he rushed. That won't be necessary. I love it, she stated honestly. Looking across to what had once been Baxter's bedroom, his memory wiped the smile from her face. May I bring you a martini, Miss Pilgrim? Yes, definitely, she said, before adding, Dashwood, I need to say something before I lose my nerve. I can't guarantee, she began sadly. He interrupted her. I, perhaps, have a better understanding, more than most, that there are no guarantees for anyone to a long and happy life. I'll be back directly, he assured. Pilgrim sat down. The afternoon sun was streaming through the window, causing her to wonder how she could enjoy its warmth and light, with Baxter cold in the ground. And after everything that had happened, she listened to Dashwood shaking her martini in the butler's pantry. She didn't deserve his consideration. Her memories were rankling against her logic, making it difficult to know if she'd done the right thing in coming back. Dashwood returned holding a frosted martini glass. An olive, with a slither of lime rind tied through it, lay bobbing on the bottom. As he leaned down, placing the glass on the side table next to her, she abruptly looked up anxiously at him, recalling the last time he'd placed a glass next to her. Experiencing the same recollection, he gave her a tight smile, adding lightly, "I've been perfecting it for you, with a little help from William, our head barman. I've called it Resurrection." Pilgrim burst out laughing. "You're joking," she said. Seeing his serious expression, she immediately stopped. "It's the pick-you-up of martinis," he enthused, waiting expectantly for her judgment. Lifting the glass to her lips, she took a long, satisfying sip. "Wow!" she exclaimed, swirling her finger in it. "This is awesome! Do I detect a hint of fleur de citron? You should definitely put your name to this." As an aficionado when it came to martinis, she was honestly impressed. "It's the cat's pajamas," he said.